Happy Christmas. There we go. My name is John. I get the privilege of being the vicar here at St. Mary's. And just before I start, everything that's done here this evening, the spoken words, the readings, the poetry, the performances, the music, is all done by members of our community. I'd love us to just give us a huge round of applause. It's incredible. I, this week, got to see my 4-year-old son's acting debut. It was in the school nativity where he had to deliver a single line, which he did with mesmerizing talent. As he pointed, "Look, let's go to the manger and visit the little one." It was clear that my 4-year-old son has a future on the stage. And we've already kind of laid foundations for him to become a full-time professional actor. But when we were talking to him and one of our family members asked him what he wanted to do when he grew up, he responded like this: "When I grow up, I want to be a crocodile." His response got me thinking about that question, or even quest, that many, or if not all of us, go on to discover what meaningful purpose that we might have in our life. Got me thinking of a story that I once heard about a dad and a son going on a walk when they came across a graveyard. The dad turned to his son and said, "What do you notice about this place? What do you notice about the tombstones?" And the son thought for a little moment and responded, "Well, some of them died quite young. That's a little bit sad. Some of them were buried next to their partners or their spouses, but they had died at different times. I wonder whether one of them got lonely without the other. And then some of them were alive in like the 1800s, and that was millions of years ago. I wonder what life was like for them back then." You know, pleased by the depth of his son's observations, the dad then said this: "One thing that you will notice on every single tombstone here is there is a date for when that person was born, and there is a date for when that person passes away. And in between those two dates, there is a tiny little dash. Your whole life, son, on earth is going to come down to that tiny little dash. So what will you make of yours?" Each one of us here have one dash to live. So let me ask you this evening, what are you going to make of yours? You see, I ask that because I believe that each one of us here wants to live a meaningful life. You want your dash to count in some way. So what does a life of meaning have to do with the Christmas story? Well, our invitation at Christmas, in and amongst the turkeys and the baubles, and depending on which markets you go to, the bratwurst, is actually there is an invitation to discover the light of Jesus. This isn't just a metaphorical light. It's an illuminating light that brings definition and clarity to everything that it comes in contact with. You see, the light of Jesus is peace in a hurried and frantic world. It's joy, deep soul-level joy and contentment. It's hope, regardless of the circumstances you face. You see, this illuminating presence of Jesus brings light and freedom into your life. A way of trying to explain this, let me give you an analogy. In the UK, generally, most farms are delineated or around the edge of their property. Farmers will build a fence. You see, the purpose of this fence is to keep their livestock, the things that they own, inside their property. The fences are there to show the animals where they can and cannot go. Whereas in somewhere like Australia, where the farmer's land goes on for hundreds and hundreds of miles, building a fence around the edge of that property would be, one, too expensive, and two, way too much time and work to maintain. So what they do is they have a different approach. In the middle of their massive amount of land, what they build is a well. They build a well because the animals are drawn to it because it's the only place that they can find water. And around the well, vegetation springs up for them to eat. You see, there is this common misconception about the Christian faith that being a Christian is about following a certain set of rules, almost like living inside a particular fence, and you're told which field to live in and what you can and can't do. Be good, don't lie, kind of behave the best life that you can live. Whereas actually the invitation of Jesus is to come and find life as you drink from the well. Come and discover the light of life in Jesus. As we've heard, a light to live by. A light to live by is not a set of rules and regulations. Rather, it is Jesus drawing us in, showing us how to become fully human, showing us how to discover our full potential and our full purpose on earth. So if Jesus is the light of the world and a light to live by, why does he come as a baby? I think to answer that question, you've got to get past the mechanics of Christmas so that you can discover its essence. I think the mechanics of Christmas are kind of the festivities, the parties, the turkey, the eating copious amounts of quality streets with the background justification that we'll hit the gym in Jan, which very rarely happens. The mechanics are basically the things that we gather around with friends and family to celebrate this season. And you know, there's nothing wrong with the mechanics. In fact, they are some of the very best bits, some of the biggest memories and joy that comes from it. However, the essence of Christmas, the essence of the Christmas story can sometimes get lost in some of that Yuletide cheer. You see, that first Christmas was messy. It was a frantic rush to the finish line in Bethlehem that at the time was described locally as a runt of the litter kind of town. You had a terrified and confused teenage mum who didn't know what she was doing or what she was really getting herself into. You had a bewildered Joseph dad who was wondering, where did this kid really come from? The venue was the last resort B&B that they could find, and the manger was a feeding trough for cattle. And that's nothing to say, that doesn't say anything about the agonizingly painful process that mothers go through in giving birth. And you know, it's into that chaotic, frantic, and painful scene that God arrives as a fragile and helpless baby. Jesus comes to us in the vulnerability of a baby, because any real connection involves vulnerability. Whether that's a parent and a child, a friendship that goes beyond how are you, whether that's a partner, a spouse, or even with a stranger, any real and meaningful connection involves opening ourselves up, shedding light on who we truly are, for it's the only way that we could ever be truly known and truly seen. You see, at Christmas, Jesus arrives in the fragile womb of a Middle Eastern teenager, and he entrusts himself to her care. What this says about a God who is willing to open himself up and be vulnerable is that he is willing to open himself up and be vulnerable to make a connection with you. You see, Jesus grew up. He became an adult. He walked this earth. He lived our life. He was the author of life. He preached love, joy, peace, hope, forgiveness. He lived a beautiful life in order that we, in his footsteps, might be able to do the same. You see, God has opened himself up to create a connection with you. The real question is for us, are you willing to open yourself up to do the same, to make a connection with God? So this Christmas, would you consider this with me? What are you going to make with what's left of your dash? See, in Jesus, a light to live by, he brings meaning to our dash. He brings purpose. We can discover true joy and true freedom in a relationship with him and in a real and honest connection found in vulnerability. We can find the deepest and truest connection that anyone could ever know, because Jesus is not a far-off conceptual God of the clouds. Jesus in the midst of your joy and your pain, of your brokenness and your boredom. He enters into the messy shed behind a forgotten inn in the middle of nowhere to say, I see you, I know you, I love you. Come and step into my light.